Welcome to the React Component Challenge #1 solution. So we're trying to do this pin to bottom thing. If we look at our app, we've got a component mount. We're going to stream some lines in here, set our state. Every single time we set state, we add a new line. And you can see over here, lines are being added to this endlessly. And as the user, I have to scroll down to the bottom of this to see what the next line is. I don't want the user to have to scroll. I want to keep this thing pinned to the bottom. And to do that, I want to implement a component that says pin to bottom right here. And then, just by wrapping it, I want this thing to keep it pinned to the bottom. So I've got the component up here, and we can run it. So what we need to do is just work with the scroll position of our element. So I'm going to say whenever the component updates, let's find our node, and then let's set the node's scroll top to the node scroll height. And if I run this, then it should stay pinned to the bottom the whole time. So much suspense. Oh, okay, it worked. I'm not done yet though, because if the user scrolls up, it throws me right back down to the bottom every time I'm scrolling. You can see that this is really annoying. So I don't actually want to pin this to the bottom when we're scrolled up. Or another way to say this is I only want to pin to the bottom if they're scrolled down. So I could, and I saw some people do this in their solutions, I could in component did update, I could go and find like this last node down here and figure out how tall it was, and then scroll down by that much, or do some math. Like a lot of kind of fun solutions, but working a little bit harder than you need to. I saw one using DOM mutation observers so that you could get the measurements of these things. React actually has a lifecycle hook called component will update. And this gets called right before we update, which is the perfect time to take a measurement and see where the scroll position is. And then we don't have to worry about this pesky node that came in at the end. Instead, we can measure it right before we render new stuff. So let's get our node again. And we're going to need a few things. We're going to need the scroll height, the client height, and the scroll top of this node. Let's do a little drawing to think about what we need to do here. But first, all that scrolling is distracting me. So what we've got here is this is our client height. Our scroll height is how far the total height of this thing when you include the scrolling that could be behind it. You know, if we're scrolling down here, the scroll height is that distance. And then our scroll top is how far from the top we've scrolled. And so if we should pin to the bottom, we should only do that when our client height plus our scroll height, so we're going to take the scroll height from over here and add it down here, when it's equal to our scroll height. That's when we know that they're scrolled to the bottom. So we can and to be safe, why don't we do if it's greater than or equal to, just in case there's any sort of rubber band scrolling going on. So over here we want to say this dot pin to bottom equals the client height plus the scroll top is greater than or equal to the scroll height. And now we've saved off this this little property here. It's going to be true or false. And so then when we actually update, we can decide say, hey, if this.PinToBottom, let's do this work. So quiet in here. Okay, it's working. Now if I scroll up, okay, the lines are coming in, but it's not scrolling down. If I come back down here, then it will start pinning to the bottom again. Now I got this little buffer here, so let's just add the buffer in. So we, if we look at what we had going on here, the buffer, we're just going to add just a little bit more with the buffer so that if they're scrolled almost to the bottom, like just barely away, like maybe 50 pixels away, we'll still pin it to the bottom. Okay, now I'll scroll up just a little bit and you see it still pulls it down when I'm within those 50 pixels. But if I scroll a little bit higher, it won't pull it down. So if you scroll down, but not quite all the way, it'll keep on going. Yeah, so again, we use will update because that's the perfect time to measure the scroll position. And a lot of times people have questions about variables like this or properties on your class instance. The question comes up, why don't you use state? Well, if we called set state in component will update, we're actually going to cause an infinite loop, and that's going to make React really upset because we're trying to set state there. And we don't actually render pin to bottom. This is just information for us to work with the imperative DOM API here. It's not our declarative state that we actually render. And so you don't put stuff in component state that isn't something that you render, because that's your render state. It doesn't necessarily mean the whole state of the application. It's the state that you want to render. So perfectly normal to use an instance property. In fact, you can go and look at some of the code inside of React itself, like the CSS transition groups. It uses some instance properties like this because it's keeping track of stuff that isn't necessarily rendering state. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. We'll come up with another one soon. And well, yeah, follow us on Twitter, follow us on CodePen, and we'll keep doing these. Thanks.